My name is Sam Shepard. I'm 67 years old. Compared to Fred, that's just midlife. I spent most of my life in research and development through the Department of Defense, through commercial applications, worked on projects at NASA. This is a culmination of all those tools that God gave me. I have a lot of tools in my toolbox. And I'm going to go through why the necessity to end up on this stage today and my journey later on. But there's been a lot of conflict with religion and science, and so I really want to start off first by having the Crossroads Church having me here. I've done this in 11 churches, probably 20 schools, from age 12 all the way up to 90. I hope everyone knows now that you're 90 years old. And what I'm going to start off with is talk a little bit about terms that we all know. We're going to define some things. We're going to define creation versus humanism. My forte is in these things: physics, biology, chemistry, thermodynamics, kinetics. And these are the tools that I'm going to be using. So make sure you're taking notes. There will be a test at the end of the talk. This is the definition of creation: intelligent design, a design by God as detailed in Holy Scriptures, or aliens. There are actually some people who do not believe in God, but it's easier for them to believe in aliens. So I include that in there, but we'll get through that. Humanism is all things are created by chance, a roll of the dice. And we're going to go through that too, as to why that is impossible. This is God's. We're going to start in the universe and work all the way back to a single-celled organism. Two other terms I want to define: evolution versus adaptation. Evolution requires that somehow a fly turned into an elephant. Okay, that's really what evolution is. Adaptation is the changing of an organism within the confines of its DNA code. For example, dogs. There's a whole bunch of dogs. It only came from one. And if you look in a Chihuahua, he has the same DNA as that of a Great Dane. It's just in how the proteins are displaced in that DNA code that makes the Chihuahua. That's called adaptation. But the limits are defined by the DNA. In evolution, there is no guardrails. It assumes it runs rampant. Why do the religious fear science? And why do the scientists think there's no need for a God? The faithful are afraid that their faith will not hold up to the scrutiny of science. People say, don't come and talk to me about that science stuff. All you're going to try to do is disprove my faith. The scientist believes that science can explain all things without the need of a God. It's a narcissistic approach to explaining life in general. Those that fear science in their faith are lacking faith in the Almighty God. Science was created by God. So let's start. We're going to start with a Big Bang, or what we thought was a Big Bang, to a single cell. The scientific method, this will be on the test, by the way. It's defined first having a conflict or a problem. The second step in the scientific method is doing research on what is already out there. The third step is performing an experiment, collecting data or results from that experiment, and then creating conclusions. Where did the scientific method come from? Sir Francis Bacon is assigned that privilege of having identified the scientific method. Where did he get it? From the book of Job. Read through Job from beginning to end. That's where the scientific method came from. When God called all the sons of God before him, Satan showed up. And God turned to Satan and says, "What about my beloved Job? Isn't he great?" And Satan says, "Yeah, I've traveled all over the earth." He said, "I'm very familiar with Job." And then Satan says to God, "Job wouldn't be like that if you didn't find favor with him." There's a definition of a problem, created a conflict. Satan then describes, through research, that's the part of the scientific method, all the animals that he has, all the riches that he has. Satan's done his research on Job. And then Satan proposes a hypothesis, a guess. And he says, "God, if you were withdraw all those things, I believe that Job would no longer love you." And God says, "Okay, let's set up an experiment. You go down and take all those things away, but you have to spare his life. Those are the rules of the experiment." So Satan goes down, kills his children, kills all of his animals, leaves Job in a very depressed state. And Job does not back away from a belief in God. Satan goes back to God and says, wait. That first experiment didn't work. Well, that's what we do in the scientific method. You get data and you go back and perform another experiment. He says, okay. He says, I want to bring sores and physical pain upon Job. And God says, you cannot kill Job. That's the rule. So he's got another experiment performed. So Job goes back, gives him boils, lets some of the men around him torture him by talking to him and trying to lead him away from God. Job doesn't falter. And in the end, Job wins. Satan fails. And it's the first, what's called a null hypothesis. Satan's hypothesis was proved negatively. That's the very first experiment in all of science performed in the Bible. For us to do experiments in science, we typically have to have greater than 30 experiments. If the results are the same, greater than 50% of the time, but less than 95% of the time, it's called a consensus. It's just an opinion. There's no basis of it being a theory or a law. If the results are the same 95% of the time, but less than 100% of the time, we can call it a theory. The one before that, this is a hypothesis. It's a guess. It's a belief. Doesn't mean it's true. But when you get to 95% in anything that we do, it can be called a theory. You can be 95% correct. So in your lifetime, you're probably going to be correct to that point, unless you live to be as old as Fred. And now, Alma, you get to say how many times he's been wrong, but we'll do that under another venue. If the results are the same 100% of the time, then it can be declared a law, the law of thermodynamics, the law of gravity. There's 166 laws in science that govern everything that we know today. And there's only 4 forces that run everything that we're doing right now: weak nuclear, strong nuclear, electromagnetic, and gravity. Those 4 forces run everything in the universe. Non-random events. These are events that happen when you go gambling. You roll the dice. They can be, I'm sorry. These are events that happen. For example, 1 + 1 = 2. These are non-random events. So if I told her what is 1 + 1 = 2, and I told you what is 1 + 1 = 2, you're both going to have the same answer, hopefully. Depends on your schooling. So those are non-random events, non-random variables. They happen every single time, and we understand all of those processes. All the variables are understood. In random events, these are events that we don't know all the processes. So we use a mathematics called statistics. Statistics is the mathematics of ignorance. And the reason is because we created a mathematics to describe things that we know nothing about, or we can't. We don't have enough resources, enough money to analyze. So we use statistics to get us a degree of confidence that what we're going to do is somewhat right. But it's based on a lack of total misunderstanding. We do not understand all the variables. So when we talk about random events, and evolution happened as a random event, there's a very high probability that it's probably wrong. And that's what has plagued scientists in trying to prove things like the Big Bang and evolution. There's a lot of unknown processes involved in us being able to sit in these chairs. Are there aliens? How many TV shows do we see now where we talk about aliens? Is there a God? How can we prove that there's a God? Or are we alone in the entire universe? Why do we search? This is the reason. God gave us a spirit of curiosity and intellect. We have a faithful obligation to seek the glory of God. Those who don't, and yet know different, are lost. The grandeur of God's creation. When we look in a telescope out into space, it is awe-inspiring. It is described in Genesis. And how did Moses get it right 3,000 years ago? And I'm going to go through how he detailed what is written in Genesis. The first 4 days. Science depends on, is limited to wisdom and observation. So science has very limited guardrails that we can't deviate from. Belief or faith has no such guardrails. Science is trying to find truth. Belief and faith are not necessarily true. It's only in what you believe. For example, there's Hindus that believe that the earth is held up by a turtle. They firmly believe that. The Greeks believed that Titan held up the earth on his shoulders. They believed that. So always remember that belief is universal, but not necessarily true. Otherwise, there would only be one faith and one religion if we knew it to be true. Observation is the key to science. You don't see many blind scientists. So we're limited in science to observation. In faith, we can use all of our senses to try to get to the answer. For example, here it shows a Doppler effect. When a sun is moving away from us, it stretches light, looks more red. If something's moving towards us, it's more blue. It's called the Doppler effect. But science has guardrails. Science stays on the road. It might bounce back and forth between those rules, but it cannot see the rest of the environment around it. Belief can search the entire universe without limit. Only limitation is your mind. Can we ever find the truth? In Christian faith, in the Islamic faith, there is only one truth. This is in Romans 1:20. For the invisible things of him from creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. We're obligated to look for those invisible things, and that's what science does. It's the tool that allows us to do that. And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven, this burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. We are obligated to search. There's no sitting on your hands once this information is given to you. What keeps us away? It's the fear of the truth. Keeps the spirit from seeking God. Just because you think you don't know, and the fear that brings, is no reason not to search. For in Corinthians, for to us, God revealed them through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, even to the depths of God. We are obligated. It's an immense universe. This is just our Milky Way. There's billions of these Milky Ways in our known, observed universe. There's a scientist by the name of William Barucki. Dr. Barucki was the guy who developed the Kepler telescope to look for planets and look for aliens. And it's been out there searching for a long, long time. His conclusion are, we are now alone in the universe. There are no aliens. God so loved us, we're it. He told the South China Morning Post, we have a galaxy full of 10 billion planets in habitable zones, roughly Earth size, but no visits, no communications we've picked up. How can that be? Up until now, it was just an intellectual question. It isn't anymore. There could be 10 billion civilizations or none. It could be random or non-random. There's only one. That's a pretty unique position to be in. That means that it's not random. There is a designer. The evidence certainly is none. The evidence says no one's out there. Ponder that for a moment when you look through some of these pictures that the Hubble has sent back to us, the immensity of the universe. Here's the planets found to date, 3,586. Only one with known life. The probability of life forming randomly is 0.028%. That means that there's a 99.97% chance that we're alone. Now, if I'm going to Vegas, and I'm going to go gamble in Vegas, and I have a 99.97% chance of losing, I don't think I'm going to bet. That's what science has now shown us, that what the Bible says is based in fact. Distances are beyond not only our ability to observe life, but to even make contact. It is easier for a man to believe in the impossibility of evolution than it is to believe in the possibility of God. What spirit in somebody is that causes that to happen? That's not rational thinking. There's something else moving that person to even have that concept or that belief. Like I said, the Hindus believe the earth is held up by a turtle. We live on the earth is on a turtle shell. The Greeks believed that it was held up by Titan. We hang on nothing. And we just found this out in the last 400 years. This is one that's going to shock everyone because this is one that's taught in school. Evolution is not a theory. It's never made it to that level. Evolution is only a guess, a hypothesis, a belief. There has never, ever, ever been an experiment to prove evolution. And in the scientific method, that step of experimentation is what moves it from a hypothesis to a theory. Not one experiment has ever been performed to prove evolution. The reason being is to do an experiment requires an experimenter, a creator. We don't see things happening randomly anymore. We don't see flies turning into elephants. We don't see any changes like that. It takes a creator to manipulate the DNA to change the DNA structure of one organism to another. When God made us, He made us in His image. I got asked this by a Jewish friend of mine. He said, the only problem I have with Christianity is you people believe in three gods, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I said, no. I said, we only believe in one God. He said, yeah, but you profess these three gods. And I looked at him, his name's Larry, and I said, Larry, I said, God created you in His image, did He not? He said, yeah. I said, well, do you have a mind that you create from? Yeah. Do you have a flesh and body that keeps the mind alive? He said, yeah. And I said, do you believe as a Jewish man that God implanted a spirit inside of you? He said, he said, I've never thought of it that way. The Trinity is in each one of us, in the mind, the body, and the spirit. We are in the image of God as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. No credible scientist believes in the theory of evolution. If anyone tells you that they believe in the theory of evolution, it is a totally misinformation. If you ask them, what makes it a theory? What experiment has been performed that moves it from a belief or a religion or a hypothesis to that of a theory? There is none. The only reason they refer to the theory of evolution is to give it a false credibility when they talk to people and children. Well, a theory is more powerful than a consensus. It's just a consensus. It's just a belief. The more people that believe it, the more money flows into the schools. So there's an economic reason for doing it too. And then we get to gravity. Holds planets on nothing. We don't have a clue, really, as to what gravity is. Science has to operate outside its guardrails to make this simple point that our Earth is even allowed to exist in space, to hang on nothing. We see the effects of gravity, but we don't have a clue as to what it is. This is Dr. Niels Barak. He is probably number 2. He was behind Hawking. He might be now number 1. He took all the physical constants, And he put them together in a probability that says all these constants have to be in place for us to be having this conversation. And now, if you notice, I don't know if I can do a cursor here or not, but this is 0 point. All of those zeros, 1. If that 1 ever changed to 2, none of us would be here. That's how fine-tuned our entire universe is. It's beyond comprehension from a human point of view. This is what the belief in Big Bang Theory was that some point, everything just exploded. And it got extremely hot. All the forces were made. And as you can see about right here, this is about 10 to the minus 32nd seconds. It's called Planck's length. Planck's length is the wavelength of light. It was, I don't know what temperature that is, but it's a pretty hot temperature, 10 to the 27th or something. But as the universe expanded, we got all the way out here, so we went through a period of extreme heat. It cooled down as it expanded. It's following a physical law that describes that. Until we get out here about 1 billion years, and it's minus 200 degrees centigrade. And then we get out here about 15 billion years, which is what we think is about the age of the universe now. It's minus 270 degrees centigrade. It cannot get to absolute zero. So this was the theory that we've all had up to this point. Now science has come back and they said, that may not be right. We have to rethink this because there has to be something before the Big Bang. Because we can't define the laws of gravity. There has to be something before. And we had this conversation earlier. In the Bible, does anybody know what was before God said, "Let there be light"? Now, some of you are going to already know the answer to this. I know. But there is something before God said, "Let there be light." And it's in the Bible. Now science has proven that to be absolutely correct. I'm going to go through day 1. It says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. So it was absolute darkness in space. There was no light. The earth was without form and void. I'm an engineer by training. When I'm going to design something, I do it on a piece of paper, total void of the object itself. This was God's plan and his design. How he conveys that in so little words I find astounding, because I've been in engineering seminars where it goes on for hours. But that's his design. And then in the next verse, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Water existed in the darkness and the coldness of space. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light that it was good. God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day. He didn't call it a 24-hour day. He called light day. And darkness he called night. And what that is meant is that he created everything in total transparency. In darkness, there is no transparency. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Water is spectacular. It's the most unique molecule, and we take it for granted every single day. It's the only reason that we have metabolism in our bodies, and I'm going to get into that too. Water molecules are set up with a constant vibration, a very established frequency. We tap into that at 2,450 megahertz in a microwave oven. There's a vibration. And that motion of that water molecule, when we make proteins are this big compared to a water molecule. The only way that big elephant can move is by having water molecules bump into it. It's like a wind in every one of our cells. If that water molecule was stationary or not vibrating, none of the proteins could touch each other, and life is not possible to exist. Water's unique. Its ice is less dense than its liquid. It floats. Otherwise, we'd live on an ice planet. All the ice would sink, and the oceans would eventually freeze out. All of these properties of water are astounding. There's no other molecule that exhibits all of these. Water is the magic, and it existed before creation. Here's some that come close. None of them can support life. There's the little Mickey Mouse molecule. Water has 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. The 2 most abundant elements in all the universe is hydrogen, helium, and oxygen. Helium typically is a thermonuclear byproduct of hydrogen combination. Oxygen is not. Oxygen existed in the water phase all this time. So we got hydrogen from cracking a water molecule. And we could electrolytically crack water. And when I worked at NASA, I developed an thermoelectric generator for the moon. We found water on the moon in the southernmost crater. So the fuel to do the Mars mission is already on the moon. And I see where Trump just activated the Space Force. So that's how this whole thing works. We can crack water into hydrogen, which is used to fuel our stars, and oxygen. Does science agree with the Bible? Science says the universe is full of water. But where is all the water? The Bible says that water existed throughout the universe, even before light. So science has an obligation to find the water. Wednesday, July 27th of 2011, they found an entire galaxy of nothing but water. It's everywhere. Permeates throughout the universe. These findings are very exciting. We not only detected water in the farthest reaches of the universe, but enough to fill the Earth's oceans more than 100 trillion times. The universe has a center and an impenetrable edge that if you were to travel off into space, you would eventually come to a place beyond which there was no more matter. In this cosmology, the Earth is in fact the observed center of the universe. No matter where we look, everything is moving away from us. Because of that Doppler effect, we can see that. So when Galileo says that we were not egocentric, that we revolved around the sun, it doesn't make any difference. Whenever we look out in the universe, the entire universe is leaving us at a very high rate, by the way. Here's the Earth. We have a space called the atmosphere around the Earth. We have a space where we see all the stars and the galaxies. And then we have a place out here. Is that little arrow showing up on the screen? Yeah. We have a place out here. We don't have a clue as to what it is. This is the edge of the baryonic universe. We can't get there because it turns out that the space is moving faster than the speed of light. And I'm going to go over that a little bit too. The universe is totally uniform. The difference between the red and the blue is 1/1000th of a degree centigrade. This is 90 from here to here is 90 billion light years across. And yet our universe is only 15 billion years old. How is that possible? How did it come into creation? God spoke it into creation. Word became matter. He who created the heavens and stretched them out. We didn't know this. We didn't know the universe was expanding until 15 years ago. How did Isaiah get it right when the book was written? Here's all the verses referencing a universe expanding, and not only expanding, but being stretched, accelerating in its expansion. We just found this out. And yet in the Old Testament, it was forged in writing for us to expect it. Is this consistent with what science now knows? Absolutely. The universe is not only stretching, it's accelerating in its stretch. Then you hear things like dark energy and dark matter. Science uses these terms. These are not proofs or truths. They use these to fit into a mathematical equation to try to mathematically describe what is moving the universe in an expanding fashion. These things don't exist. We've never found them. We haven't seen them. And yet they're telling us that over 90% of our entire universe is made up of that stuff, for the universe to be not only stretching, but accelerating in its stretch. This is just a representation of how the Big Bang happened. Everything blew up. Gravity got a hold, started to bring it back together again, and then it took off. And now we're in this black part of rapid expansion. So what does science say? Well, first there was nothing. Then there was a Big Bang and light and darkness and universe expansion, hydrogen, space. Then the stars formed from the hydrogen. Then the earth formed. And then life begins through evolution. What does the Bible say? There was existing darkness, water, and a grand design. There was light and dark. They were separate. Hydrogen, heaven formed and expands. One other bit of trivia about heaven. I don't know whether I talked about it in here or not, but the creation of heaven was the only thing that God said was not good. And I'm going to explain why that is. Everything else, when he said he created light, it was good. Created animals, it was good. Heaven is the only thing that said he created, and he never said it was good. Then the earth forms, life begins, stars visible, man created. All of these are now beginning to line up. The blue one is a little off, and I'm going to explain what that's about. The earth formed, life begins, and man is created or evolved. The reason the blue arrow is there is in the Bible, it's out of sequence slightly. But you have to look at it from the Bible's perspective. The stars weren't visible until the opaque atmosphere cleared up. Then they became visible. So there's a little bit of out of sequence there. We now know that there was a shroud around the earth during its creation. The stars would not have been visible, but the stars were there, and the atmosphere was lit up as opaque light because we have plant life in 4 here, beginning before the stars were observed. How can that be? They get their energy from light. That's because the light was opaque. Uncertainty in science. Can we explain this without God? Perlmutter. He's the guy who got a Nobel Peace Prize for a lot of stuff in physics, but very important guy to follow. He admits no one has any idea of what dark energy is. At this point, I think there's been a paper averaging almost every day for the past 12 years without theorists of physics trying out different ideas for what could be the explanation. If you ask almost any of them, do you stand behind your theory? Is this the answer? I think almost everyone would say no, no, no. I'm just trying to expand the range of possibilities. Physicists do not know what's going on. The implications are far-reaching. To find such a blatant contradiction to the Big Bang Theory, for example, so many years after its formulation, after so many other theories of astrophysics have been based on it, is astounding. We found a Higgs boson, which had remained hidden for so long. We found it. We can't find these answers in physics or in science. Our universe is exponentially declining in energy. Cars run out of gas. Stars run out of hydrogen. Galaxies collapse into black holes. As they do, the universe and everything in it is gradually running down. But how run down is it? It's running down exponentially. And exponential decay is unsustainable. Let me show you something here. This is a concept we're going to get into a little later. As the universe expands, it creates more volume. So we always have energy and mass. We have light and we have mass, things the seat's made out of. And we also have a third one called space. It's hard to define what space is, but space is a reality. As the universe expands to create more volume, more space is also created. Empty space is not empty. Due to the underlying quantum physics realities, their details and why space has the observed strength are not yet understood. What does the Bible say? Water existed before creation, light was created, separated from darkness, no mention of time. The universe is created and expanding, or stretching out. Science now agrees with the Bible. Day 2, God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. So you have water, land, water. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. Land, the firmament, the atmosphere area, was called heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. Science has now confirmed the biblical three forms of a firmament created called heaven. There are three heavens in time, and I'm going to go over all three of those. But the interesting part is, when the first heaven was created, there was no mention that it was good, because the first heaven was whisked away when Adam sinned. When God walked on the face of the earth with Adam, that was heaven. When man sinned, that heaven was removed. And that's why God knew that he could not call the first heaven good. And this was the way that it was structured. You had a first heaven, which is the atmosphere that we live in, the space that we live in. We have a second heaven, which is all the stars, everything out into outer space. And it says, both the waters that were above the face of the earth and the waters which he placed above the firmament, he called seas. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. Does anybody know the only other creature mentioned in the Bible that God created? is another little bit of trivia. This will show up on a test somewhere, I'm sure. Nope, whales. Yep, God created whales. He said he created whales, then he created man. Everything else, it said, let the earth bring forth. Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Whales were the only other creature that was created. So the first heaven is the earth's atmosphere. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. So that's our atmosphere. The second heaven is the vast expanse of the physical universe. It's outer space, as we call it. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, the moon going around the earth. It's all out in that part of heaven. So before man's sin, heaven and earth were together, and God walked with man in the first heaven. Then when we now know that there's three heavens, science has now shown this same fact. First heaven was the earth, second heaven is outer space, and science says there's a third heaven beyond the baryonic universe. There's something that exists outside this universe. So, is it that the edge of the baryonic universe is where God now resides? Is his throne there? And he has a vast, solid barrier? That's just me saying that. What does the Bible say about the third heaven? Does the Bible talk about a third heaven? There's only one place. You can look this up. The Bible got it right. The third heaven is outside the universe, above the crystal higher sea. And this higher sea is before and below the throne of God. Only mention is in 2 Corinthians 12:2. God resides outside of our universe. He's not limited by space and time. It is an impenetrable crystal that God's feet rests on. And in Revelations, and before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. This particular sea of glass above the firmament is above the known physical universe and at the foot of God's throne. There is a third heaven. And science backs it and says that there is. There's a third space. Heaven is a name that scientists aren't probably going to use. Science has confirmed a spiritual fact on cosmology. The edge of the known universe, the firmament above, has a ceiling of crystal ice, an impassable barrier between the world of man below and the abode of God above. The sea of crystal is a separation resulting from sin. Man can never get there as a physical being. And it will no longer exist when God destroys the old world and makes all things new after the 1,000-year kingdom of heaven and the final judgment that follows. How do we know this? For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Why did God specifically include the sea as a separate formation from the earth and heaven? So there's three entities, heaven, earth, and sea. What sea is he referring to? Because the sea of the earth is a part of earth. What sea is he referring to? In Revelations, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth with its seas were passed away. And there was no more sea, which is the footstool of God, that barrier of ice, no longer existed. So when we go back here, And it says, why did God specifically include the sea of ice under his feet was created, a separate formation from the earth and of all that was in heaven? Here we have, he breaks that crystal that separates him from man and allows us then to have a new heaven and a new earth and to reside once again with God. Earth and plants are formed. Plants before the sun, I talked about that, about the opaqueness. Our sun was created on day 4, and it was good. Top 10% of all local stars. If cooler, the Earth would have been so close that it would be tidally locked and uninhabitable. That's what we find with all the other planets we look at. If it was hotter, it would emit too much energetic radiation, and our magnetic Van Allen belt wouldn't be able to keep us from being burnt alive. Exceptionally stable, ideal place in the galaxy, co-rotation radius. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that adds stability to the whole program. How did all these things get right? All of them had to fit perfectly. If any one of those is wrong or isn't there, we don't exist. That's how fine-tuned all this is. It's the Van Allen belt that keeps us. This is why we can't. I'm going to tell you this for the first time, and I know this is being filmed, and I'll probably go to prison for this. Will you come bail me out if I do? I was part of what's called the Lunar Outpost Commission. And in 1990 to 1994, we had a project called Artemis. And I was a part of that. And we had figured we were going to go to the moon and build laboratories and habitats on the moon, construct the Mars rocket, and go to Mars. In another group of the Lunar Outpost Commission, the medical group, they found that they cannot send men to Mars. Once you get outside the Van Allen belt, in about 2 months, all the radiation has destroyed the DNA in your cells. You'll be dead before you ever get there. The cost of shielding yourself against that makes it totally uneconomical to do it. So, this is my opinion. I know this is being filmed. This is my opinion. And I think what we're doing is we're building a military base on the moon. When he talked about going to Mars to get funding, that's a very acceptable way of presenting to get funding to build a base on the moon. I was asked to rejoin the Artemis in May of 2018. And I had other things going on I'm going to talk about. I said, no. I said, there's no way we can go to Mars. Man can't go to Mars. Robots can, but men can't. And I said, I understand why what we're going to do at the moon. It's the high ground. Covers the entire Earth in one rotation every day, every 24 hours. We can see everything that happens on the Earth. And we have cameras today that can find an apple on the Earth from the moon. So it's the ultimate high ground. See if you can delete that from the video. We're at a perfect location. Our orbit is not totally circular. This is a little bit misleading. It's a little bit elliptical. But if our Earth was 4 to 6 miles bigger, it's 8,000 miles in diameter, but if the Earth was 4 to 6 miles bigger in diameter, we would have no mountains. The gravity would be so intense, all the mountains would have been collapsed into a flat surface, and we would be living on a water planet. If we were about 8 miles smaller, out of 8,000, by the way, we don't have enough gravity to hold the atmosphere. That's why there's no atmosphere on Mars. That's why there's no atmosphere on the moon. 8 miles, 1/1000th of a deviation allows us to exist and breathe air and have the right concentration here. This picture is a 5,000-year-old light beam coming out of a big bang or a black hole that formed. And it's sort of coincidental, I guess, that it's 5,000 years old. That's the oldest we have of any recorded plant life. Here's a planetary observation of it, and it's traveling at the speed of light. Now, this is going to be the deep field of the Hubble telescope. These are not stars. These are galaxies. Hundreds of millions of galaxies as far as we look, and they're all moving away from us. And the farther they're away, the faster they're moving. We can now look out and we can see the point at which they're moving at or faster than the speed of light. Now, how many in here took a physics course where it said nothing can travel faster than the speed of light? We all did. Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. That still holds. That's a law. But let's understand what that says. It says that nothing, space, nothing, space, can travel faster than the speed of light. So how fast can space go? It can go faster than the speed of light. And if there's anything in that space, like a star, and that star is stuck in that space, in theory, that star can move faster than the speed of light. But relative to its space, it cannot. Does that make sense? Okay. This is the outcome of that science has now shown. Our universe is at least 78 billion light years in radius, or 156 billion light years across. But it's only 15 billion years old. How in the world can that happen? How can the universe have a radius of 78 billion light years if the universe is only 15.3 billion years old? How can it get there, that distance? 78 billion light years. That's a distance measurement. That's how far light would travel in 1 year. So if I take 78 billion light years and divide it by 15.3 billion years, it means that the universe is moving at 5.1 light years per year. But light can only travel 1 light year per year. So this is not making sense in the science world. They're all the way back now to saying that the Big Bang didn't happen that way. There's something wrong. So, that's a problem. Stars contain 3 parts, and I'm going to explain. I wrote a paper in January of 2005. It's in the Patent and Trademark Office. It's copyrighted there. And it details the speed at which space can move. Stars are made up of 3 things. You have mass, you have energy, heat, radiation, and you have space. In between the atoms, there's more space than there is matter. That space is carried with that matter. It's always there. We don't know really what it is yet, but we're getting close. Can the apparent age of the universe be different than the actual age? This is where you get into the young earth creationist idea. They didn't know any of this, but if you go by the Bible, there is a possibility that we're living in a very young universe. Yes, if the accelerating space can travel at 1.41 times the speed of light, the 15.3 billion years turns out to be 26,000 years. It would only take, as we measure time, 26,000 years for the universe to appear to be 15.3 billion years old. Here's how it works. If the apparent age is 15.26 billion years, the actual age is 26,000 years, how far does light travel in 1 year? It travels that far. And the way that I came up with this was, if this is a black hole, very dense, this is a star that's being attracted to this black hole, and its speed, by Newton's laws, its energy that it contains, is E equals 1/2 mv squared. That's the kinetic energy equation. And that's what you see there in that first equation. E equals 1/2 mv squared. So this thing has an energy of E equals 1/2 mv squared, and it's flying into the black hole. As it approaches, it accelerates all the way up to the speed of light. At the speed of light, its energy becomes, instead of being Newtonian energy, it is converted into relativistic energy at the speed of light. So these two equations have to be equal. So 1/2 mv squared has to be equal to mc squared. And the m's cancel out. There is no more matter, it's only space. And if you solve that equation, take the square root of 2, which is what it is, it turns out that the velocity of the object is 1.41 times the speed of light. And with that in mind, now we can explain why the universe appears so big in such a short period of time, and only 26,000 years has actually evolved. Now, I also hunt dinosaurs. And I've got a National Geographic dinosaur expedition if somebody wants to go. In June, yeah. It's hard for me to look at those fossils, which I've been taught were 65 million years old, and think that they're only 26,000 years old. But the fossils that I dig up are all in a sedimentary basin. They're all from a flood. I've got T-Rexes on top of Triceratops. I've got duck-billed dinosaurs in with T-Rexes. They're all jumbled up. So I found this plant fossil bed, like the bottom of a river, and there we found a dinosaur, a pretty big one, laying on top of this fossil bed. Well, when I cracked the fossil bed open, here there's like coal, carbon. So I take the carbon, I send it to Berkeley, they do a carbon dating on it. There shouldn't be any C14 in it at all if it's 65 million years old. Their comeback to me was that it was 6,837 years plus or minus 52 years. The dinosaur is laying on top of the fossil bed, the plant fossil bed. That's a problem. That means that dinosaur died only 6,000, 7,000 years ago. I can't get that fossil, the analysis, back from Berkeley, but I have a huge plate of these fossils, and we're going to go out and dig them up in June. Oh, it's fun. You're out in the middle of nowhere, and you pee and poop in a hole. That's the other bad side about that. We're all old enough. Fred, you've probably gone to an outhouse, haven't you? Yeah. So there's only 3 possibilities. That light traveled at a rate of 5.1 times faster than the speed of light. There's no evidence of this, and it completely negates the Big Bang theory. The universe existed intact 15 billion years ago, which negates the Big Bang theory and supports the old universe creation theory, or the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate with implications that all of creation may be less than 26,000 years. It supports the Big Bang, negates evolutionary biology, supports young universe creation theory. This is a game of tilting a scale. Built for us by the best and most orderly workmen of all. This was a very famous scientist that said this, Sir Isaac Newton. They were all Christians. It's only a scientist being non-Christian is only a recent event in the last 20th century. Even Einstein said that I don't believe God rolls the dice. The Earth is very special, as we all know, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. We've talked about most of this. But no matter where we look, it's all moving away from us. If I was in another galaxy, Andromeda Galaxy, and I looked up, I would see everything moving away from me. No matter where you are in the universe, it's moving away from you. So is time constant? No, it isn't. Light has no time. The light coming out of that bulb right there is eternal. The light we see from 15 billion years old doesn't age. Something moving at the speed of light has no time. Time doesn't click away. And that's the equation that Einstein came up with. It's called time dilation. The faster you approach the speed of light from an observer's point of view, the less time there is. So, does anybody know the Hebrew name of God's name? Yahweh. Does anyone know the true name that Jesus would have gone by in Aramaic? Yeshua. His name was Joshua, not Jesus. Yeshua. And that's Joshua. That's where we get the word Joshua from. So how do we end up with the word Jesus? Greek. Lesus. Of Zeus. Yep. Leseus. And the reason is because when they took it to the Greeks knew Zeus was their ultimate god. So they named Christ as Lezus, or Jesus, as we pronounce it in English. Yeshua was his real name. That's what he would have gone by. Another bit of trivia that could be on a question someplace. It means I am. Yahweh means I am, not I was or I will be. I am. I'm present. Eternally present. That's why God's not here, because we don't live in a present world. Because by the time I say this, it's already the past. I see you, all of you, milliseconds after the light leaves your body. You are always in the past. Everything we see is in the past. We have no present. And we only have a hope for a future. So time is a barrier for us. We have a past, we have a future. Mankind has no present. God is all present. And he exists. He not only has seen everything that's going to happen, he already knows everything that's going to happen because he has no past or future. He only has present. He only sees us in the present. That's a difficult concept. So we have two worldviews. We have naturalism and supernaturalism. One's random, the other one's non-random. The non-random requires an intelligent designer. We found out there are no aliens. So there has to be a creator. Now let's get to life. Life as we know it is made up of a coded set of programming language. There's 4 of them, A, T, C, and G. They're all names of proteins. A only sticks to T. C only sticks to G in the ladder of the DNA. So if I have A, C, A, T, G, 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 they all match up with the second spiral of the DNA, and that's what creates the code. So when we make a protein, we split the DNA so that this one has the C, A, T, G there, and it's grabbed by robots in our cell, and they're robots, and I'm going to show you pictures of them. It grabs, it comes in and it reads this. This is called messenger RNA, and it reads these in reverse image. Runs out, pulls it just like a train, looks like a piece of spaghetti when it leaves the nuclear pore. It goes out, and there's ribosomes, big proteins that come down and they grab a hold of it, and it reads it like a zipper, and it poops out a protein. Snips it off, and that becomes a protein, like an insulin protein, for example. That's how we make proteins that allow us to live. There's tens of thousands of those. But life is simple. It's only soap bubbles, metal, and plastic. That's what we're made of. Every cell in our body is a fatty acid soap bubble, the same as if the children blew a bubble on a soap machine. The difference between our cells and that bubble is ours is a bilayer. We have 2 soap bubbles that actually make up the membrane. This is going to be on the test. But you're all going to know the taxonomic classification, even though you probably don't remember it. Just remember the verse, kind people come out from God's Son. Kind people come out from God's Son, and you'll know everything about all the taxonomic classification of biology. Kind stands for K, kingdom. People stands for phylum. Come stands for class. Out comes from order. From comes from family. God's is genus, and Son is species. Kind people come out from God's Son. Now, in adaptation, from the family level below, they all have the same DNA. Things of their kind. We heard a lot about kind in Genesis when you read the Bible. Made the things of their kind. That goes all the way up to the family level. The DNA rules. Above the family level, you have to have a change in the DNA. It has to be created differently. For example, dogs are in a family, but there's Chihuahuas, the Chihuahua genus, and then under that genus, there's tiny miniature Chihuahuas and other things. So, but they all have the same DNA, up to the family or kind level. The Bible always referred to things of their kind. Cattle, buffalo, snakes, of their kind. That applies all the way to the family level. Above that, you have to change the DNA. Now I'm going to show you what's going on in your own bodies now. This is a sperm cell. No life would exist without that. Its tail spins at 100,000 revolutions per minute and can stop on a quarter turn without torquing itself into existence. Go ahead. Yep. I am. Yeah. Yep, that's coming up very, very, very shortly. So the way that works is this motor. Any electricians in here understands how a motor works, how we make a motor. We have a stator, we have a rotor. Look at all these proteins. They're all established as a motor. This here, these little things here are stators. There's 9 of those. If any one of those is missing, this tail will not turn. It's a short-circuited motor. Looks just like a motor, the armature of a motor. And this is in every one of our cells. So evolution cannot develop this, because did it develop one of these stators and then wait around for 4 million years until the next one evolved? They all had to be created instantaneously at the same time for this to be functional. Otherwise, it would be obliterated. This is what a cell looks like, the complexity of a single cell. We have ribosomes that actually take amino acids and make proteins. We have proteasomes that, if the protein's not being used, snips it off into pieces and recycles those amino acids. We have these dynein complexes, which are walking robots. And I'm going to show you, if I can here. This is what is actually, this was done by Harvard. This is what is actually going on in our blood system. These are lymphocytes moving along the epithelial cells inside the artery. They have like Velcro, and it makes them move slower than the rest of the arterial flow in the bloodstream. And they're looking for bacteria or viruses to keep us clean and pathogen-free. You can see how they hang up. It just slows them down enough so that they can look for bacteria in our blood system. This is the phospholipid membrane that I was talking to you earlier about. This is the outside surface of every cell. And that's a cholesterol lipid raft that we can actually move proteins around very quickly on the cell membrane. This is what a protein looks like when it crosses the phospholipid membrane, and it can communicate between outside or inside, bring nutrients in, has a whole bunch of functions. The chemokine is a quarterback. He signals to the cell exactly what he wants it to do. You have 1 trillion cells in your body. They're all hopefully operating like this. We're now inside the cell, looking underneath. You can see how proteins, this is typically of a glucose channel where it would allow sugar to enter into the cell once it's electrically charged. There's no gravity in a cell because everything is so small, the gravitational force doesn't exist. So it's as if it's operating in space. These are the exoskeletons that hold the cell together. Little robots build it as it's needed. If a cell gets under stress, it'll try to reinforce the cell by building more steel work, girders to hold it together. Here you're going to see, looking down through the steelwork of a cell. Now we're deep in the cell, but you can still see the support beams that holds the cell together. This is in real time. This is about how fast one of these steel beams are actually polymerized and put together. If it runs into another one, it'll just depolymerize. Here's a severing protein. This is a robot that goes in and cuts if it's not needed, and it'll recycle those pieces. These are microtubules. These are the superhighways of the cell. These are what delivers nutrients to the nucleus, and here they are. He must have run into one down the end, couldn't grow anymore. He says, uh-oh, I can't build a highway here. He completely depolymerizes the chain, and they're used somewhere else. This is the dynein complex. This is a robot that walks that superhighway carrying vacuoles of nutrients into the nucleus for processing. These are real. We have pictures of these. That's the mitochondria. That's the manufacturing plant that generates all of our energy and the conversion of ADP to ATP, or AMP all the way to ATP. The centrosome is the general contractor. He's the guy who tells the cells where to build the steelwork and the structures. Here's the nuclear pores. The coded RNA comes out, reconnects with the other end. A ribosome comes, latches onto it, finds the starting point, and it reads the RNA and poops out a protein. That's how we get the proteins coming from our DNA code. Once that protein is gathered up, it's not in the right form. It's taken into the ribosome, and it's folded, perfectly folded. Here's one that actually the nucleus needs a protein, and it knows to put it back into the nucleus. How can you not believe that there's a creator? This is the endoplasmic reticulum. It's a fatty lipid layer, soap bubbles. It collects all of the proteins that we need, encapsulates them into a phospholipid membrane, and Santa Claus delivers it. How can you even look at this and not think that this happened by intelligent design? And this is going on in every one of our cells in our body. If proteins need to go out into other cells, it just merges with the cell membrane, the phospholipid membrane opens up, and it discharges all of them there. The chemokine, like I said, is the quarterback. He's transmitting signals, so cells communicate. If one cell gets injured, this one will tell the adjoining cell that it's injured. The folding of these proteins, and I'm going to talk about that when I get into the cancer stuff too. Here's a chemokine that's going to communicate up through the extracellular matrix and get a hold of another cell. And they talk to each other, chemically communicate. Here's a leukocyte that's made contact with a bacteria, has sensed something is underneath these cells. These are arterial cells. The leukocyte will change its shape, go between the cells without losing a single blood vessel or a blood corpuscle. And it searches our entire body 24 hours a day looking for this. That itself is pretty astounding. Now, let's see if I can get back to, I don't need that. All right, cut that guy right in midair. Let's see here, I'll get out of that. Let's get out of that. Here we go. Yeah. that
What is your definition of a robot?
something that operates autonomously.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a pretty elaborate sensory that it even knows to go hook up to that bag of nutrients and walk it in that direction. There's something that triggers that. There's an artificial intelligence that they refer to it. I think it's not artificial. I think there's something that's pre-programmed in it. But that's how it would work. In life, we have 3 rules. Being born, you're immediately dying. First rule, number 1, you cannot win in life. There's a scientific reason for that. You can't get something from nothing because matter and energy are conserved. So the moment you're born, you're in a losing battle. Second rule, you can't even break even. You can't get your money back. You can't get your past back. That's right. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And you can't get out of the game. Welcome to life. Now, for evolution to work, it's got to violate these laws of thermodynamics. This is Gibbs free energy. There's a first and second law also. All proteins are left-handed. That was very important in a lot of the cancer research that we did. When we try to synthetically make a protein, we make both a left-handed and a right-handed molecule. Same hand, different configuration, different 3D structure. Only the left-handed molecule works. Some of us are old enough to know about thalidomide and the child defects that had with that. They thought man was so clever that he could make a left-handed, or make thalidomide. What he didn't know was when they make it synthetically, they make a left-handed and a right-handed molecule. Left-handed molecule stops morning sickness in women. Right-handed molecule can't hook up to allow the children to grow their arms and legs. So these children were born with no arms and no legs. It was a terrible, terrible thing that organic chemists had to come back. They call it chirality, and we used it a lot in the things I'm going to talk about now. Always remember this, the Bible is not a science book. But when the Bible mentions science, it has proven to be correct. All hypotheses, theories, and laws of men are subject to revision or abandonment as we find out new things. The same as the Big Bang Theory. You're not hearing many physicists now supporting the Big Bang Theory. There's something else going on. Science is proving a plausible but limited tool with considerable observation and theoretical support to tip the scales in the favor of biblical creation. The probability of us having this conversation is 1 in 1 times 10 to the 120th. The reason that number is calculated that way, just to form a 150 amino acid protein in our body is 1 times 10 to the 164th. There's not enough time, even if the universe is 15 billion years old, for us to make randomly 1 protein. We are more perfect than that which is possible. Evolution is only a hypothesis or a guess. No experiments have ever been performed. Honest and true scientists do not believe in the theory of evolution. Here's a life cycle of an algae cell. It exponentially grows. It matures, then it dies. All things follow this same parabolic curve. So what happens with accelerating things? Here's accelerating technology. What I did here is take the patent number and plot it versus the year that it was patented. It's exponential. Our rate of technology is exponential. Here's species extinction, exponential. We're losing 3 species an hour. There's 1,740,000 species. Do the math. It'll tell you how much time we have before all life ends. I'm not going to do it here because it could scare people. Here's the decline from the fossil record of all life. 542 million years ago, instantaneously. It's called the Cambrian explosion. All these animals appeared. And then we've been in a steady decline ever since. This is population expansion, acceleration of national debt. Trust man or God. This was an actual picture. This is an actual picture I took of a Southwest flight out my window. Scared me. Okay, so let's go into cancer and why all of this was so important in the development of this story. In my life, in 2003, I was diagnosed with incurable bone cancer, cancer called polycythemia vera. There was no chemo, no radiation. I was a dead man walking, and that's pretty much what they told me. I had 10 minutes to 10 years. Every morning I get up to shave, I looked in the mirror and said, is today the day I get to see God? I did that for 4 years. I was bled every month. It's the old analogy, the solution to pollution is dilution. So they hooked me up, take the blood out, put saline in, and it messes up your electrolytes. It wasn't a very good quality of life. So I got a little tired of that. And one morning, it just came to me, there's got to be some animals that don't get cancer. And I found 5 animals in my research: salmon, pink flamingos, sharks, elephants, and naked mole rats. No incidence of cancer in those 5 animals. So at the time, I was working for a project in San Diego, and Scripps Oceanographic was on the team with us. And I asked them, I said, can you do tissue samples on these animals? And they came back and said, yeah, that they knew what was in those animals. And I said, what was it? And they said, it's a chemical called astaxanthin. So I knew where astaxanthin came from. It came from an algae called Hematococcus pluvialis. I began growing it in my backyard in one of those hillbilly hot tubs you see advertised at Walmart. True story. Started at 4 milligrams, and my phlebotomies got pushed out to once every 2 months. The slope of my climb out of my red blood cells declined. So I thought, well, that's working, but I didn't know the side effects. I didn't know if it was going to kill my liver or what was going to happen. But so I went up to 12 milligrams, still no side effects, and my phlebotomies got pushed out to every 4 months. I thought, okay, I have 2 slopes of a curve. Now I can use calculus off those slopes and determine. I was 50 years old at the time, and I don't want to be bled for the next 50 years. If I live to be 100, that's okay. So I just put in the equation, how much do I have to take such that I'm not phlebotomized in 50 years? And it turned out to be 96 milligrams a day. So I started taking 100, and still no side effects. And in 2007, my phlebotomies ended. In 2015, I was declared cancer-free. I spent 8 years trying to figure out why that worked. I lost 2 family members because I refused to give it to them because I didn't know the side effects, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. But it took me 8 years, and fortunately had the resources and the tools to figure it out. I spent $1.2 million of my own money. Didn't take money from anyone else. And then I reached a point where I began to figure out why it worked. And then all of a sudden I realized, well, I'm going to live, but I'm going to be broke. So it became an interesting paradox. So I began giving it to people who were in stage 4, sent to hospice, no more chemo, no more radiation. In 2013, that was the very first lady. She had inflammatory breast cancer. And she, in 33 days, was cancer-free. And MD Anderson was shocked. They called it a miracle. I told her, I said, I don't care what they call it. It doesn't matter. And I wasn't moving the product, I wasn't advertising, and she's still alive today, and she's cancer-free. We now have well over 1,200 stage 4 cancer people that the progression of their cancer has stopped or they're in total remission. Now, this is what I found. These are all the diseases, inflammatory diseases. This is how it presents. This is what causes it. Fructose, probably the worst thing you could ever, sodas, bread. There's cancer, cardiovascular disease, fibromyalgia, arthritis, diabetes, lupus, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and MS. They're all inflammatory related diseases. So I went back and said, okay, what's causing these? What's in the primary causes? Smoking, vaping, fructose, sugar, hormones, sterols, hypoxia, ionizing radiation. These are all the causes, and they cause 4 free radicals. This was the game changer. There are 4 chemical compounds that cause 97% of all human death. 4. The astaxanthin and the Valasta neutralizes all 4 of those. So you won't get those diseases. That's why it works. There's a test that we would run called a C-reactive protein test. It's a measure of your inflammatory state. And we want that number to be less than 1. Most people with cancer are operating between 20 and 60. When we give them this, their CRP drops down to normal, their blood work goes normal. And we found when Dr. Allison got his Nobel Peace Prize in February on identifying the PD-L1 cancer, it turns out that the astaxanthin sticks on the end of the PD-L1 in the carboxylic group and shuts it off. And now your immune system can come in, sniff that cancer cell, and I've got some pictures here. This one's pretty interesting. This is glutathione, age 42 in women, 50 in men. Nature stops producing glutathione. Nature is taking you out. And that's why the women's change of life gets so intense. It's caused by these 4 free radicals. So when you take this, you see a moderation in your hormone changes. Men, age 50, their glutathione production starts really down pretty rapidly. And that's why men in their 50s start getting heart disease. You start seeing more diabetes, weight gain from insulin resistance. What causes insulin resistance is a misfolding of the insulin protein. When that insulin protein touches the hydroxyl free radical, it misfolds. Now you can't make contact with the cell, doesn't open up the glucose channels, and you can't get sugar from your bloodstream into your cells. Here's the PD-L1 expression on a tumor cell. This little hair-like thing sticks up. If that touches your immune system will run away, and it will not see the tumor cell and will not kill it. This is the defense mechanism of how cancer works. On the end of that PD-L1 is a carboxylic group, and the astaxanthin sticks to it, turns it off, so this connection cannot be made, and it allows your immune system to go in and kill that cancer cell. A lot of you have heard of antioxidants before. Turmeric, chocolate, everyone loves chocolate. They all have an antioxidant capacity. And this is where Fred comes in. Fred has done this his whole life using certain antioxidants. These are all antioxidants that would absorb a certain portion of those. The scores off to the side are what's called ORAC scores. These are oxygen radical adsorption coefficients. And you can see turmeric there has an ORAC score of 127,000. It's one of the more powerful antioxidants. Let me show you what astaxanthin is. The turmeric is 127,000. Astaxanthin is 2.8 million. There is no comparison. That's why it worked. It's the strongest antioxidant known to exist on the planet, natural occurring. This next slide coming up is a lady who had basal cell carcinoma right here on her forehead. And they were going to remove a pretty substantial portion in what's called Mohs surgery. It was 2 inches wide, 1 inch high, all the way to her skull, right in the middle of her head. It was going to cost her $127,000. It was her college fund for her kids. She had no insurance. She called us and she said, will this work? And I said, yeah, it'll probably work. But I said, let's just try putting it on topically also. So this was January the 9th of 2019, after the biopsy to confirm that it was basal cell. This was January the 12th. This is how fast it was growing. And there's a reason that we're working on it now in the Inflammatory Disease Research Foundation. The extracellular matrix that covers this, once you remove that, the cancer can go rampant. There's an empty space for it to grow into. So the ECM is extremely important in understanding what happens with cancer. Now, this was the first day of treatment. This was 1 month later. She was cured. It fell off in a Band-Aid. 3 days later, it fell off. Cost her $126. She's still cancer-free. This next one, I'm glad there's no children here. This was a gentleman who had stage 4, it's fairly graphic, stage 4 inflammatory breast cancer. This was a man. Yep. About 30% of all inflammatory breast cancers are men. Yep. Men are a little looser with showing pictures of their breasts. So he sent me this picture. It had eaten clear through his chest wall. His nipple is right there. This is his arm coming down here. He was stage 4, sent home with hospice with 2 to 4 months to live. He called me up and he said, can you save my life? I said, no. I said, I'm not in the life-saving business. I might be able to improve your journey, but nobody's getting out of here alive. He just sort of chuckled. And there's an interesting story that goes with this. After 3 weeks of the Valasta protocol, he was declared cancer-free. Let's see if I can show you that picture. For some reason on this slide, let me back out here a minute. Shoot, they merged the pictures in this thing.
Do the patients continue to take the...
Only in a maintenance level. Yeah, because they're not producing enough glutathione in their bodies. So if their antioxidant level is still low and they're not able to offset the oxidative stressors, it'll all come back. So we have some of the testimonials here. Bobby Utterback, who was on, Freddie and I went to Sirius Radio in New York. Bobby was there, stage 4, 49 years old. He was given an option to take chemo or to do this. It was one of the bravest moves I've ever heard. He said, I'm not doing the chemo, I'm going to take his chocolate. And I'm going, I don't know whether I could make that decision or not, but he did, and he's cancer-free. So there's still surprises that I even get. He was pretty far along. He had a 10-inch tumor in his kidney. It had moved into his colon and into his liver. This one was, she just cried and cried on the phone. I get several of these. And we'll send it out with it, but you can read through here. It says, let's see, she just goes on and on about it. It stopped her cancer too. But when we gave it to people with cancer that had Parkinson's, their Parkinson's went away. It wasn't something I expected. So we go back in the lab through, I'm also president of the Inflammatory Disease Research Foundation in Columbia. So we have access to labs. So we went in and said, why are these people's Parkinson's symptoms going away in 10 days after they go on this? And they're treming 400 to 800 tremors per minute. I have 28 of these, and it's violent. They have hallucinations. They can't hold food on a fork. And we gave it to them for other reasons, for arthritis, cancer, and their Parkinson's shaking went away. So go back in the lab trying to figure out what was going on. Parkinson's is believed to be caused by a lack of dopamine in the substantia nigra in the brain. And it turns out, in our work, it showed that that's not the case. The neurons are still producing a lot of dopamine. But that's what dopamine looks like. The molecule looks like. Our research indicated that Parkinson's is caused by oxydopamine. Oxydopamine is what we give to animals to give them Parkinson's, so that we can test Parkinson's medications on them. We find the oxydopamine ratio to dopamine ratio in the brain in Parkinson's is very high. Why is the oxydopamine there? Why is the dopamine converting to oxydopamine in the brain? And it was because of a free radical called a hydroxyl free radical. It attaches itself, so now you have 3 hydroxyls on the dopamine molecule. Oxydopamine is the cause of Parkinson's. And when we stop the hydroxyl free radical reaction, their symptoms go away. This has tremendous potential. If you know anybody who's got a tremor, you need to get them on this. It happens very quickly. In less than 2 weeks, their tremors will probably stop. If it doesn't stop within a month, then just don't do it. But in all cases so far, we've been able to stop them. And that's what causes it. The further oxidation of 6-hydroxydopamine produces even more ROS, produces even more hydroxyl free radicals. So it's an accelerating problem. You accelerate completely out of control. And with that, I'm going to stop.